Okay, is that good for everybody?
I say it well, Fred.
Okay, thank you. All righty. Tonight, this is a potpourri. This will be all kinds of things that we're just going to briefly touch on. I think most of the topics tonight can actually be developed into full-blown individual lectures. So that's just how much information that is there to learn if you're interested in that sort of thing. So this is an introduction to honeybees and beekeeping, and most of this is an introduction to honeybees. All right, the subject at hand here is the honeybee, the western honeybee, the Apis mellifera. It's an animal, an arthropod, and of course an insect, and it's related to the ants and the wasps. It's a member of the family Apidae, which means it's a social bee, and we'll get into what the social bees, what the uniqueness is of them in a little while. Honeybees exist, bees exist because of flowering plants. And the flowering plants have been around for a long time. The oldest fossils that are found are about 120 million years old. Now, I've got a couple of them on the screen here right now. The first bees actually descended from wasps, and specifically what's called the sphecoid wasps. And what the bees did was that they exchanged flesh for pollen as their source of protein. And they became what's called eusocial. Eusocial is a colonial enterprise where there are individuals that have various tasks. There is one reproducing individual, that's the queen. And and there are some males, and then all of the rest are non-reproductive females. They're the workers. And the eusocial aspect of it is that the workers take care of the offspring of the queen. We generally don't think of these creatures as individuals. We think of the colony as an organism. And the common term for it is a super organism. As I said, bees have been around for a long time, about 100 million years. Here's some really nice specimens that were preserved in amber. Amber being a secretion of plants, like a sap, that when insects or anything else gets caught up in it, the material hardens and can actually preserve what's inside it for quite a long time. This specimen right here in the middle was recovered in Burma back in 2007, and the strata that it was in was dated at 100 million years before present. I put this in, I always like to put this in because it's just so cool. This is a bee, not a honeybee, but a stingless bee. This fossil was found in the Dominican Republic a few years back, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. The really nifty thing about it is here on the back of the bee, there's also preserved orchid pollen, which undoubtedly was one of the protein sources for this bee. The modern honeybee is really rather recent. Apis cerana, which is this bee down here in panel D, split from some ancestral form somewhere between 6 and 8 million years ago. And it spread out of Africa into Asia, where it diverged into the 6 modern day species of the eastern honeybee. Apis mellifera, which is up here in panel A, arose quite recently, between 700,000 and 1.3 million years ago. And it has given rise over that period of time to 24, actually 28 different, you could call them races of bees. Their period of geographic isolation was not long enough for these bees to actually sufficiently change so that they would become a new species. So rather than a new species, this is 28 cousins. When we look at the world of honeybees, this line right here is the demarcation line between the eastern honeybee to the right and the western honeybee to the left. The western honeybee extends from the Ural Mountains in Russia up through Scandinavia, Great Britain, all of Europe, the Middle East, all of Africa, and Madagascar. And it's in that area where these different races of a honeybee have arisen. We mentioned before briefly about the eusocial nature of honeybees. There are 3 castes. This is the worker, this is the drone, and this is the queen. The drone is generally a non-reproducing female, and she does virtually everything, all of the work in the hive, with the exception of laying eggs, which is the job of the queen over here. She's the reproducing female. She has, as you can see, she's anatomically or morphologically pretty distinct, much larger than the worker. She is a gravid female, so she lays fertilized eggs. And this guy right here in the middle, that's the drone. His only purpose is to mate with virgin queens. This time of year is kind of a sad time for these bees, for drones, because they have no function over the winter time. And so these bees over here, the workers, throw them out and just allow them to either die of starvation or due to exposure. Interestingly, when you look at the queen and you look at this worker, genetically, these creatures are identical, with one exception, and that is that the queen, during her entire development time, from a larva up into the pupating stage, is fed exclusively a secretion. It comes from glands in the head of the female honeybee, and it's referred to as royal jelly. And it is a hormonal substance that attaches to DNA of the developing bee at distinct spots and turns on genes that otherwise wouldn't be turned on. So they're silent in the worker, but when the royal jelly is fed to the youngster, these chemical groups sit down on the DNA and allow these genes to be turned on, and this large reproducing female is what results. When we look at honeybee growth and development, we start with an egg. You see the egg stands up here in the bottom. Generally, the female will lay it upright right in the middle of the cell. After 3 days, it hatches and becomes a larva. The larva will go through multiple stages of molting, and it will become a pupa, and then eventually it becomes what's called an imago, which is the pre-emergent adult. The queen, by the way, if you notice this little factoid up here, as we get on into spring, a queen might lay up to 2,000 eggs per day. So when you get your own hives and you have the spring reproduction kick in, you have to kind of keep on top of it, because you realize in a matter of a week you could increase the population of the hive, could increase 10 to 15,000 bees. This just shows the development cycle right here: egg, larva, pupa, imago, and then the emergent adult. This is just a generalized time scale here. The egg hatches in 3 days. The worker, the larva is mature in 8 to 9 days. The queen in 8 days. The drone in 10. And when we look here at emergence, the queen emerges in about 15 to 16 days. The worker in about 21, and the drone in 24. The longer time for development for the drone is also used to the advantage of one of the pests that we have to deal with in beekeeping, and that is the varroa mite. That longer period inside a sealed cell, and right here, this is a brood frame right in here, and notice all these cappings on here. They have kind of a fibrous appearance to them, very different from the cappings, the wax cappings that you see on honey. This particular one right here has a lot of openings. That can be a number of things. That could be a queen that's slowly failing, or it could be there's certain behaviors in some strains of bees where they can sense varroa mites in the cells, and they will actually open the cell up and pull the pupa out and actually get rid of it to get rid of the mites. That's a possibility for this as well. Once the bees emerge, they go through a maturation, process. It all has to do with genes being turned on and turned off. And when certain genes are turned on, certain behaviors are seen in the worker bee. And this is probably the easiest one to look at right over here. Notice in the first 2 days, the newly emergent worker cleans cells. And what that means is the cells where, like the cell that she was hatched from, she'll get in there and she'll pull out all of the skins, the exoskeletons that she shed during development. Then for the next week or more, she may take care of the queen, she may feed the young, or she'll do work on wax. After that, there's some nectar processing that's done. When bees bring nectar in, it can be up to 80% water. They will dehydrate it by fanning it with their wings, and they will also reduce the sugar through through a chemical substance that's in their saliva. And it turns it from a complex sugar into 2 simple sugars. And these simple sugars have incredible staying power. Honey can actually be, well, you might not want to do it, but they have found edible honey over 4,000 years old in Egyptian tombs. Somewhere around 21 days, then the new bee becomes a field bee, and she'll go out and forage for water, nectar, pollen, and so on. Now, we mentioned about the individual reproduction is, the egg to the larva to the pupa and so on, and to the emerging adult. But there's another kind of reproduction that goes on in here, and that is the reproduction of the colony itself. And that's done by swarming. Now, early in the season, on the bottom of the frames in the hive, in the brood frames, the bees will build structures down there that are called queen cups. Now, that doesn't, if you see those in your hives, you don't need to panic. Those are Those are always put in, and they're for just in case. If the colony is going to swarm, then what they will do is they'll make new queens in these queen cups. But they may not. I mean, you know, the colony may not swarm. If you if you're a good or maybe a lucky beekeeper, I guess I'm neither, because you know I generally have at least one swarm. I've had some years where I've had more swarms than I care to mention. Anywho, when they do decide to swarm, those queen cups down on the bottom, they'll extend them, they'll make them longer with wax, and in the bottom they'll put royal jelly. And if the decision is made to swarm, some of the nurse bees will go and they'll get newly laid eggs and bring them down and stick them in these queen cells. Now they were queen cups, now they're queen cells, and they'll be fed exclusively royal jelly until the thing is sealed up. About 9 days after the placing the eggs in there, the developing queen has gone through all the larval forms and is going to pupate in the closed cell. Also, about that time, when they close those cells off, within a day or two or three, they are going to swarm. And convincing them otherwise is quite a chore. Over the course of this year and next year, there will be talks that will be given at the club, the regular monthly club meetings, where we'll actually address the issues of swarming and what you can do to prevent it. As I said, when they seal those queen cells, about half of the colony and the existing queen will issue from the hive. And this on the right here, that's an actual swarm. And yes, that's one of my colonies a few years ago. It's an absolutely stunning thing to see, in that it's like an up and down waterfall. The bees come out and they're going down, and they'll take into the air. At the same time, they're going up and flying into the air. You could have 20,000, 25,000 bees. I know you can't see it in this picture, but this thing is just covered with little dots. And, you know, that's the swarm when it first issues. Generally, what it's going to do is they'll find a spot and sit down, and they'll have a little discussion over where the new colony needs to be located. Sometimes they'll sit down and they'll have a little discussion in an hour or two, and then they're gone. I've seen them hang up in trees as long as 7 days. That's what the swarm looks like when it lights in a tree or on a house or in a car or wherever. We work really hard to prevent this, but you know, to go out and recover a swarm is great, because these bees are really, really motivated to build a new home. And so, you know, you put them in a box and they will draw out new comb in like a matter of a week, where other colonies, you know, just established colonies, it might take them an entire summer to draw out as much wax as a swarm will in a single week. Okay, anatomy. The honeybee is broken down into 3 general areas. There's the head, there's the thorax, and then the abdomen. The head has all of the mouth, the proboscis, the mandibles. It has the brain. It has pharyngeal glands in the head. It also has the eyes. There's 2 compound eyes. You can see here, I guess, there's 2 compound eyes. And up here on the top of the head, there are 3 simple eyes. The antennae right here are incredibly sensitive chemical detectors. They're just absolutely loaded with sensory cells. And this is kind of important because a lot of the communication that goes on between bees involves chemicals, specifically various types of pheromones that they use. It might be a worker might release something, or it might be the queen, but the chemical communication is highly important in these creatures. There's also other communication that involves squeaks and pips and sounds like that. And then there's something called a dance language, where the bees will actually move their bodies in a certain way and communicate, for instance, the location of a new nectar or pollen source. The middle part in here, that's the locomotion part of the honeybee. That's the thorax. It has 3 pairs of legs, 2 pairs of wings. Back here in the abdomen has the digestive tract. It has the crop, the intestine. Something that's very important, and you will, I'm sure, agree as you continue on in your beekeeping career. Back in here this is the business end where the stinger is located. You can actually work bees and not get stung. But I can tell you that if you decide that you want to take shortcuts, you will get stung. There's ways of interacting with these creatures where they're calm and you're calm. But, if you do any rapid movements, jarring movements, banging things around, they don't like it because like they live there, and, you're bugging them. This is just a cutaway showing the inside of the body. Here's the mouth parts. The mandibles are up in here. This thing is kind of important right here. That's the crop or honey stomach. When they go and visit flowers, they'll take and they'll fill up this thing to some certain degree, and then take it back to the hive and regurgitate it. They're able to pull it up in here through this proboscis here, which is a really interesting organelle, in that it has 3 parts that when pulled together actually forms a tube. And then there's a tongue inside the tube, and the bee works the tongue up and down so that it's very similar in action to an old mechanical hand pump on a water well. And so, it's worked for 100 million years, and I guess the existence of these things kind of confirms that. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, here's the face, the compound eyes, the 3 simple eyes up in here, the antenna. This is kind of an important thing. By the way, all of you will get a copy of this talk. I made a PDF file of it so that you'll have this to refer to. It's a lot better than trying to take notes or take pictures of this. The interesting thing here for me is that bees have a shifted visual spectrum from humans. Here's our visual spectrum right here. We see from red to violet, but the bees is shifted. It does not see red. It sees orange up through ultraviolet. Also, with the nature of the compound eyes and these ocelli, the bees can also detect polarization in light. And this is what allows them to navigate from the hive to a floral source and back again. They remember, when they leave the hive, the angle of the sun. And then as they fly, it's referred to as optical flow. They see things, landmarks that they fly past. They go to the flower source, which has been communicated to them by a sister in the hive, get whatever it is, the pollen or the nectar. And once she flies, she's actually able to do in her tiny little brain a reciprocal. in that the optical flow she knows is reversed. That is the landmarks. And also she knows to take the reciprocal of whatever the angle was of the sun. And it's a highly efficient navigation system. Here's the business end. That's the stinger. The stinger is back in the back part of the abdomen. Here you can see venom. Whenever she stings you, this right over here, it's the tip of it is serrated. So when it's stuck into you and she starts to pull away, like you see this bee right down here, the stinger is stuck in your skin and she'll pull away, and that leaves the poison, the venom gland right here, which pulsates, and it acts as a little pump. And so as long as there's venom in there, it will pump, 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 pump like your heart and push the venom out. That's why if you get stung, what you want to do is get that stinger out as quick as you can. Don't try to grab this, because when you grab it, you're going to empty it. You're going to squeeze it right down through the stinger and into you. What you want to do is use the side of a thumbnail or use a credit card and scrape it across your skin at right angles perpendicular to the surface of the skin. And that will pull the thing right out. The sooner you get it out, the less venom you have in you, and the less reaction that you'll have. Okay, I mentioned chemical communication. There are glands all over bees that manufacture and then release chemical substances. Some are always being released, but some have musculature that's involved, kind of like the poison gland with the stinger, in that it can be activated by the bee for whatever purpose it is. Here's a good example right here. This bee is standing on its head, has the back of its abdomen high in the air, and what it is doing, it is releasing a pheromone that's referred to as a Nasanov substance. And you'll see if you get into your bees and you're in them for a while, you'll see bees get out on the landing board and also get up high on the rim of the top box, and they'll stand on their head with that posterior end stuck in the air. And it's basically a substance that bees can use to home in on, to come back it makes it easier for them to come back to the hive. Chemical communication, again, this is just all sorts of things. Here's just the queen alone. The queen releases substances that can attract a drone if she's a virgin and needs to mate. It can also induce the swarm clustering when they swarm. It solicits this kind of very unique behavior from the retinue. That's her nurses. They'll get around, they'll clean her, they feed her constantly. She lays more than her body weight in eggs every day, so she eats a lot. Then there's the worker reproduction, queen rearing, comb building, a behavior that is solicited from workers, the guarding and the foraging and so on and so forth. This all comes in response to several different pheromones that come from the queen. And when you get time, when you have this presentation, you can go back and read this detailed information here on the right. I put this in just as a listing for you all to have. This isn't all of the hormones pheromones that the bees use for communication, but it's a pretty sizable number. this is really kind of cool here. I took this picture years ago, and it's one of the best examples that I know of a guarding response. This bee right here is the guard. This bee has just come in, and she probably has nectar in her stomach. They come up nose to nose. Now notice the guard bee is reared up on its legs, standing tall, whereas the bee that's being challenged, she's kind of leaned back. And what this bee is doing, if you notice here, she's got her antenna out here, and she is trying to ascertain whether this bee is from this hive. And she'll touch her with these. If she's supposed to be here, this bee will just move aside and allow this bee to go in. On occasion, and actually probably quite frequently, a bee that got lost but has a honey stomach that's full of nectar can actually, she's going to fail what's called the QMP challenge. She's going to fail that. But if she offers up some nectar to this bee, it's kind of like a bribe, but she'll let this bee go in. When this bee goes in this colony, it's going to pick up the pheromone odorants from inside the hive, and she will become a member of this colony, which is kind of a really fascinating thing, I think. Honeybees are cavity nesters, by and large. Well, historically they would have been in tree hollows, but of course, these days they'll get into soffits, and they'll get into all kinds of openings in brick walls and such. It keeps the bee wranglers busy to go out and remove swarms from people's homes and such. But again, they're cavity nesters. Inside the cavity, there's when you look at the comb, there is a distance here. It's 3/8 of an inch. And you'll find it kind of uniformly, even on curved sections. It's referred to as bee space. And the recognition of bee space was a fundamental discovery that allowed then the building of artificial habitats for hives, in other words, for bees. Kind of an interesting thing about them being cavity nesters, the reduced light apparently is needed to activate the wax glands on the underside of the abdomen of the bees. Even though you will see at times, you'll see bees that will build hives right out in the open. But it's a matter of degree. When they're in darkened enclosures, it's much better for their wax glands. Don't know why, just is. The ideal cavity has a certain volume. The entrance has a certain area. Generally speaking, the entrances are preferred facing southwest or southward, and the nest is typically some distance off the ground. All of these things were observed by a Philadelphia minister back in the 1850s. His name was Lorenzo Langstroth, and by observing these things, he was able to devise what is known as the Langstroth hive. Movable frames. It's a wonderful invention. It's not the only hive that's in use, but it was the first one of its kind that actually, recognized bee space and did not, attempted to not have any spaces within the body of the hive that was bigger than 5/16 to 3/8 of an inch. That hive is in use worldwide. There are other hives, but they aren't as used as the Langstroth hive. This is these are Langstroth hives right here. They have these different components. I'm going to guess that, not next week or the week after, when we get into equipment and such, these different parts will be described for you. But generally speaking, brood nest is down here, and these smaller boxes on top, those are honey supers. And so whenever you want to make honey, you put these smaller boxes on top and cross your fingers. This is one of the frames. Again, this is an invention of Langstroth. It's a movable frame. This particular one is a brood frame. If you look at it in cross section here, here's the top bar here, and the bottom bar is over here. And there's a thin sheet of either plastic or beeswax that has embossed in it a hexagonal pattern. And the bees then will produce a beeswax and draw out the comb for both reproduction and for honey storage and pollen storage. Again, this was, Langstroth at his best. The engineering principles that he was considering. An important thing is convection, like a stack effect. We use, for the most part, we use screen bottoms these days in the hives, and it aids immensely in the stack effect, but also it allows certain parasites, when they get gleaned off or drop off a bee, they'll actually fall down through the bottom onto the ground, and they'll be unable to get back in. But this stack effect, this convection, is important, to reduce the heat load in the summer, but it's also really important in the wintertime to get rid of the moisture that the bees exhale through their breathing apparatus, which are referred to as trachea. Cooling the hive, by and large, they do two things. They'll get water, and they'll put water on surfaces inside the hive, and then they'll flap their wings, and this causes the water to evaporate, and it's evaporational cooling. When water evaporates, it pulls a lot of heat out of the air and cools it down. Here you can see these bees with white dots on here. Those are bees that are in there flapping their wings to, cool down the interior. For heating, they have specialized bees. The Germans coined the term heater bees about 15 or 20 years ago. They're bees that have the ability to raise their body temperature up to 108 degrees. And what they'll do is they shiver. They shiver their flight muscles. They get very warm, and they can either flatten themselves like this on the comb, or they can take and crawl down in head first into the cavities. Here you can see them here. You can see this is the back end of heater bees that have gone down in. This is all brood. Notice this pattern of holes. This isn't a failed queen. This is probably an early spring brood pattern. And, when nights are more likely to be cool. And so those heater bees will crawl down in there, and they'll shiver, and that will heat up the wax and the developing bees in these brood cells. Also, you'll see that some of these cells might not be for heater bees. They'll be filled with nectar, because all this shivering is very energy intensive, and so they can take and tank up here, get some carbohydrate in them, especially the bees that take and flatten themselves like this and shiver to heat the surface. Beeswax. Wax is the structural basis of the nest. It requires 6 grams of honey to produce 1 gram of wax. The hexagonal shape and also the angle of the cell as opposed to the back of the cell. It's at an angle of probably about 35 degrees or so. Anyway, between the structure and wax itself, these honeycomb can actually hold up to 45 times its weight in load. We don't build anything in the real world, in the human world, that has a 45-to-1 weight to strength ratio. It's it's an amazing thing that's developed over over eons of time. This is I won't read all of this. A lot of this is here, so that you can go back afterwards and look at it. But the thing is that these creatures have a teeny tiny little brain, and yet they're able to perform an enormous number of tasks. Now, one of the really interesting things right here is they learn to associate a flower's color, shape, scent, and location with a food reward. And they can also remember the location and time of day of up to 5 different flower types that at different times of the day have a nectar reward. All flowers do not produce nectar at the same time. And that's a great evolutionary adaptation, because there's only so many pollinators out there. So you'll have plants that will produce nectar early in the day, mid-morning, noon, early afternoon, and so on. And that way, there's less of a stress on the pollinators that are there. Another interesting thing is the fact that they will communicate things such as food discoveries through dance language. And this bee right here is actually doing what's called the waggle dance. It'll go around in a circle, and it shakes its back end at a given frequency. The frequency of that vibration translates into distance from the hive. So it's shaking the back end as it walks around in a circle, and then it will cut across that circle at an angle. That angle is the direction from the hive that this food source is located. The frequency of the shaking will also tell the other bees the distance. So when you put all these things together, you see that honeybees have a symbolic language, and they're the only non-primate known that has a symbolic language. They're going through these motions and these vibrations, and it's passing on critical information for the survival of the colony. Let's see. Most of this, I'm gonna skip over. You can go back and read it afterwards. Again, this is up to 5 floral sources a day, and so on and so forth. We mentioned that there are eusocial colonies, that the worker and the queen develop from the very same genetic code. The big difference being the chemical groups that came from the royal jelly that the developing queen bee ate will chemically modify given sites in the genome and allow genes to get turned on or turned off. Okay, honeybee nutrition. Honeybees' existence is dependent on these 4 things: nectar or honey, which is their energy source, their carbohydrate source; pollen, which is the source of protein; water, which is for hydration, for drinking and for cooling the hive; and then propolis, which are plant resins and waxes from the buds of given plants that have, the propolis has a biological activity. And the bees will place propolis on the inside of the hive, and also they'll use it to fill in spaces that are bigger than bee space. This picture right down in here, this is all propolis. And the interesting thing about this is it's a part of the immune system of the superorganism being the hive, the entire colony. And this has antibacterial activity. And so, the bee in and of itself has a rather primitive immune system, and it has, its function won't cover everything that is necessary. It's kind of like us and, some of these viral diseases, especially like COVID these days. We don't have a protection, an innate protection against it. But we can actually induce one, through infection or through a vaccine. And, this is just the supplement for the bees. It's kind of similar. So I just stuck this in here because this is just massively cool picture. And it's down in here, it describes the different plants that these pollens came from. Okay, the honeybee's energy food is honey. I described before, it's something that has about 80% water. It has to be dehydrated. It's done by fanning of the wings to drive off the excess moisture. So you got to get the moisture down to under 18%. This, once they get it down, dehydrate it, and also when they cleave the complex sugar, which is sucrose, and they cleave it into fructose and glucose, you have a material that has this is kind of important right here in the middle, in that the pH is low, has low water content, high sugar, which makes it inhospitable to most microbes. And this is why you can, under ideal storage conditions, you can go into an old Egyptian tomb and find honey that is still edible. It looks and smells funky, but you can still eat it. And you note in here the various components that you will find in honey. This is just kind of cool. The pollen delivery system, the bees, they're pollinators, they go to various flowers, they pick up pollen. By and large, the pollen is packed onto these, the special part of its back leg. It's got long, barbarous hairs that come out. It packs it on both sides, but also there'll be pollen stuck on the other hairs of the bee's body. This is what the bee is interested in taking back to the hive. All this loose stuff that's stuck on here, this is what allows pollination to occur in the plants. It'll pick up pollen from various flowers. When it gets back into another flower, some of this pollen will fall off, and it will allow for the plant to reproduce. This right here is pollen storage in a hive. Notice the pollens are different colors. It's really kind of cool in the spring when you pull one of the pollen frames out of your brood nest, and there's such a variety of colors. This doesn't really do it justice. The color variety is much, much greater than this. Okay, bees are pollinators, and pollinators is important. They are important, and they're important for us. And I always like to stick this slide in whenever I talk about pollination, and that this is pollination needs for a hungry planet. Last night at 5 o'clock, I went to the Census Bureau and I pulled this number down. 5 p.m. This was the population of the world. And when you consider that 7.7 billion people is a lot of mouths to feed. And when you look at the leading food crops that we have, there's 115 that have been tabulated. 87 of them are dependent on animal pollinators. And the principal animal pollinator on the planet is our honeybees. And when you look at what they bring to increased yields of different types of crops, it's a 35% increase in yield, and that works out to about 2.7 1.5 billion metric tons of food and seed that is accountable to the pollination efforts of these animal pollinators. You know, when we use them, the thing that's important is that they are, they work so many different kinds of flowers. And, you know, without them in the environment, especially in our agricultural environment, you know, we have, you know, fields that, that the farmer wants to suppress weed growth in the areas adjacent to the field or between fields. And, you know, if you're going to use, take advantage of the native pollinators that we have, North America has about 4,000, a little over 4,000 different species of bees. But they don't have the environment available in our agricultural areas for them to survive, because, you know, when the crop is done, when the cherry tree is no longer blooming, they still need nectar and pollen. And if, you know, if we have suppressed the growth of weeds and other trees in field margins, then we're just not going to have much in the way of native pollinators in the area. Without honeybees, well, without pollinators in general, the yields of many plants would decrease by more than 90%. And I'll show you a few examples here in a couple of minutes. Honeybees are very versatile and cheap, and one of the great things about them is their foraging range. They can routinely forage up to 6 miles from their nest. In desperate times, they'll go up to 12 miles. But you know, the thing about the long distances is it takes energy. It takes energy for the bees to fly 12 miles. And actually, you would have to tank up on honey or nectar in the hive so that you would have the energy to fly to the crop. And then by the time you get there, you've used up all of what you had in the crop to make the flight. So you tank up in the field, and then by the time you get back to the hive, you've used up most of the nectar that you just got from that crop. So you see, from an energetics point of view, there is a finite distance that these things can successfully go out and back, you know, in the course of their normal business of getting nectar and pollen. Nevertheless, when we look here at the bottom in red, that's kind of an important thing too. The activities of just honeybees in the U.S. amounts to about $28 billion worth of food and seed per year. And when you throw in the native pollinators, that's another $3 billion. And remember, you know, the native pollinators, their issue is they live in nature. We have our bees in hives. We move them around. If you're a good beekeeper, they're not going to starve. Whereas with the suppression of weed growth and such in field margins and such, we just can't have many native pollinators there. Just going to go through this real quick. This is not everything. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Looking at bee pollinated crops. When you look here, this is this plus 90, plus 90, plus 70, plus 90. That is the impact of pollination by mostly honeybees on this crop. Okay, so we got, you know, apples, apricots, avocados, berries of various types, more fruit crops, grapefruit, 70 to 80% increase in yield. If you like cantaloupe, or if you like muskmelon, both of those are 75% increase. We look up here at the kiwi fruit, 80 to 90% increase in in yield of the plant when we have the pollinators there. Down here we got persimmons. They're 90% increase in yield. Vegetable crops, if you like asparagus or broccoli or pumpkin, cabbage, notice the increase in yields that bee pollinators bring to them. Here's carrots and cauliflower, 90% and 100%. The almond, 100%. The almond is completely dependent on the honeybee. In the United States, we grow them in one area. That's from Sacramento south for about 100 miles in the Central Valley. 80% of the world's almonds are grown there. And migratory beekeepers have to move in almost 2 million colonies of honeybees to pollinate that one single crop. People and bees have been around for quite a while. This is a carving in a cave in Spain. It's about 9,000 years old, and it shows a person shinnying up a vine to get at a bee colony in a cavity in a cliff. Beekeeping, formal beekeeping itself began about 5,000 BC in Egypt, and these are drawings from various Egyptian sites. These are hives right here. Here's your bees, and this right here shows a person dumping honey from a pail into a storage jar. The glyph here, the Egyptian bee glyph, it's one of the glyphs that was used to denote the emperor, I guess, the ruler of ancient Egypt, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. And I guess it was, I think it was Lower Egypt had the bee glyph to designate that part of the nation. The art of beekeeping was passed down through the centuries. This is a drawing of a bee yard in a place called Tel Rehov. This is in the Jordan Valley in Israel. This is 3,000 years ago, 1000 BCE. This is a Roman apiary. It's on Malta. It's 2,000 years old. Here's different parts plus an entire hive from Greece. They were keeping bees in these vessels 2,400 years ago. And as we pass down to a much more recently, prior to coming to America, this is the types of hives that were used in Europe. The woven skep. Here it's laid on its side, and you can see what the colony looks like inside. This is a box hive, just a big empty box with a little slot cut down in here so the bees can come and go. And then, here we go to the modern Langstroth hive. This one right here, this is ready for honey harvest time. This is the brood nest. All of these things up here are honey supers. And then here's the same bee yard, part of the same bee yard. And these are hives that are getting ready for winter. These jars right here, that's a little supplemental feed, just some sugar water. It's a heavy sugar syrup, it's called. That's put on to make sure that they have sufficient carbohydrate to overwinter. Honeybees aren't native to America. They came initially to the Americas by ship. And the first honeybees came into Virginia in 1622. And, when they got here, there were already over 4,000 species of native bees. But, we've already seen with the passage of time and the change in our agricultural methods that, the native bees don't have the opportunity to be as impactful in our agriculture as the honeybees are. This, again, is something you can just look at on your own time, but this is, over time, and these were the various types of bees, the races that were brought into this country And so that when you get to today, you find that the bees that are, the species that are, the races that are highlighted in red are the ones that were brought to this country, so that of the 28 subspecies of bees in the world, 13 of them were imported into North America, and their genetics serve as the basis for our bees. Products of the hive, lots of really cool things: pollen and propolis, honey royal jelly, bee venom, bee wax. You know, you can comb honey. A lot of people like this is just liquid honey. All of these things here, all these Burt's Bee products, I think we have people in the Anderson County beekeepers that actually make these themselves, not Burt's products, but the very same products, and they make under their own label and sell. The people that do it seem to have an awful lot of enjoyment in actually making these things. Harvesting honey, you know, you start the hard work. It takes a lot of intestinal fortitude. You know, take and remove the supers. The supers can weigh, depending on the size of boxes you got, anywhere from 30 to 90 pounds. If you're crazy enough to put deeps on as honey supers, I can tell you that, I mean, I did that years ago, but there's just no way these days. I'm a little older than I used to be, and this can be hard on your back, your knees, your hands, etc. But after the hard work, you know, here's something you take and you convert your kitchen into a honey house. And, you know, here's some of the honey supers right here. This is a centrifuge, and you put the frames in here, centrifuge the honey out, and it goes through this little strainer, and you collect it in 5-gallon buckets. My best single harvest was probably 6-7 years ago, 8 years ago, and from 4 hives, I got 660 pounds of honey. I don't recommend that. That's a lot of work. And I don't like to sell honey. You know, I do love to give it away, which is what we do these days. I'm a little more efficient on my planning for setting up hives for production, so that I can lower the quantity that I have to deal with. You know, this is what the frames look like. The honey has a wax capping on it. You use a knife of some sort to get it off. We stage them in this drain box, and then it goes into a centrifuge, or it's centrifuged out. The honey comes out the bottom and goes into these collection buckets, and then later on it goes into a bottling bucket, and then you get something like this. And I can tell you that if you get 660 pounds of honey, you get about 12 or 15 of those collections right there. So it's fun, you know, if you restrain yourself. Let me put it that way. This is something that we'll talk about this year. We talk about it every year, and that's the honeybee pests, predators, and diseases. We've got a boatload to deal with. Some are really easy to deal with. Some have a variety of strategies that we can use to minimize their impact. There's a couple that are really bad, and you know, one of the worst is right here. It's American foul brood. It's a spore-forming bacteria. The only way to get rid of it is to destroy your hive, all the bees in the hive, plus all of the equipment itself, and it's normally done by fire. And there's just some cool little pictures in here that you can see. This is a greater wax moth. That's a small hive beetle. That's a varroa mite on an adult bee right there. As I say, as we go through every year, we do talk about these. There'll be someone that will describe like for instance, the parasites, what they do, the kind of diseases they carry, and then how we use different methods, both engineering methods and also treatment methods to minimize their impact on our colony. this is a summary of the things that we have to be concerned with. I'm not going to go over them now. You can look at this, once you get a copy of this talk, but you can see that there are a number of things that we do have to think about over the course of the year as beekeepers. Some of you may actually really embrace this because, once you get to the point to where you really understand these things and you get in and you're doing these various treatments and knowing why you're doing them, and then you get good positive results, there's, it can be very fulfilling. Here, lastly, I'm just going to show you a few pictures of information. Information is important. Number one, information is, join a bee club, ours or somebody else, and go to the meetings and learn from people that have been doing this for years. Another thing is to subscribe to journals. These two over here are the two most prominent in this country, a Bee Culture and American Bee Journal. They really don't overlap. They have unique stories and information in each one. They're monthlies. These are foreign journals that you can get. They're incredibly entertaining, as are these two right here, and you can learn an awful lot from them. Books are important. This used to be called the Beekeeper's Bible. I guess it probably still is. It's got tremendous information. They put a new version out in 2015. It's probably like about number 90. I don't know. It's been around for over 150 years. But here's some other books that you might be interested in. Monographs. A lot of these, in fact, all of these right here are actually available on the internet. You can download them. Scientific papers. That's one of my things. If you can get past the jargon, there's some incredible information that can be found in them. And never, never, never underestimate the information, really useful information that you can get from bee catalogs. They are just chock full of all kinds of great stuff. And although if you notice right here, this one went out of business. It went bankrupt in 2016. They used to be really nice people. They would attend like the state and regional meetings, and bring their equipment and give you a little discount on them. Anyway, my last picture, I'll just show you a picture from a number of years ago of part of my apiary in the winter snow. So that's it. And local bee clubs, find the one that's nearest you. And I guess I'm ready for questions if there are any. So let's see.
Cathy, are you there? Do you want to say anything while people are gathering their thoughts?
I want to thank everybody for coming, and please join us next week when we have two other speakers talking about the beekeeper's calendar and your equipment, which is a great follow-up from what Fred talked about today.
We booked.
Welcome your questions.
You're now the host again, Paul.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, I echo the thank you too, and of course we all thank Fred. Let's give him a little virtual applause or whatever if you can. But I'm guessing if you're thinking of having bees, you have a million questions, and because there are so many things we didn't tell, a lot of practical things, but Fred covers so much. And we left a few minutes at the end for questions, but we also have a few minutes after the subsequent classes, if you think of them. So I'll just stop there. And if anybody has any question, let me just say, oh, go ahead. Was that a question?
Hi, yeah. So this is Hannah speaking. Hi, I have a couple of questions, like probably not for this meeting only.
Right.
So one thing I was wondering is, he said that, a great presentation, by the way, it was really nice listening to it. And so he was saying you want to avoid the swarming. Why is that? Like, why is that problematic when your bees start to swarm?
If you're interested in honey production, when bees swarm, you're going to lose about half of them.
Okay.
They're going to abscond and go off and establish a colony somewhere else. So from a direct personal point of view, it would be that. There's another aspect of it as well, is that if you live in a neighborhood, in a town, and your bees abscond, they're going to go somewhere. And more often than not, they're going to go find a cavity in somebody's house or a wall, and you become unpopular real quick. So
Okay, yeah, I see that.
Yeah, we've had that happen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then another question, I'm just going to continue until you stop me, okay? So, can you, if you have a swarm, can you, like, if anything ever happens to your queen, can you assign them like a new queen, or once your queen dies, the whole hive is a mess?
no, this is a management thing, and it's really very simple and straightforward. Okay, number one, an important thing for you to consider is, when you start beekeeping, start with 2 hives. And you might say, why is that? And this is an example in that if you have a colony that a queen fails and you don't notice, like right away, let's say a week or 2 goes by, and then you get into your hive and you see it's spring, say sometime in the spring, and you see no eggs and you see no larvae, you have a queen that has failed. And so if they have not, if the bees, I mean, she might even been killed, and you might have killed her when you got in and started moving frames around, and you roll her between the frames, and there she's very delicate. So what you do is you go to the other hive and you get a frame that has eggs there, and move that frame into the hive that the queen failed in, and right away that colony will pull some number of those eggs out, put them in the queen cups, develop them into queen cells, and raise new queens. I can tell you that when they swarm, my personal record, don't tell too many people because it's interesting, but it's also shameful too. My personal record for queens in a hive that swarmed is 27.
Oh, okay, that's a gang.
So, they don't make just one new queen. They will make a lot. They might make 6, 8, or in my case, 27. And so what happens then is some of the queens will hatch out, and they make little peeping and piping sounds. And some of the queens that have emerged can actually go around and sting to death queens that are still inside, but they're not going to kill everybody. So you might have then, once all of the emerging is done, you might have a half a dozen queens or more. And what happens then is, on a number of occasions, the bees will separate themselves within the brood nest, and they'll fly. They have to get mated. So let's say you have 8 queens. Okay, a queen has, when she goes out on a mating flight, there's a 15% chance she's not going to make it back. And so it's a good thing to have, a number of queens hatch after a swarming event. Or when you do a requeening by moving eggs in from another hive. They go out and they mate, and some number will not get back in. And then they'll set up territories inside the brood nest, and they start to perform. And the rest of the colony kind of, looks at them, judges who's going to be good and who's going to be bad, and they will kill the losers. And they do it by balling, where the bees will cluster on her. And if you remember, we have those heater bees. they can take and they can raise their body temperature up to 108 degrees. And basically the queens are so delicate, they will literally
Fry
cook.
her.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wow. Sounds bad, but it would probably be interesting to see that once. I'm not going to provoke it though. I promise.
What causes them to swarm? I'm sorry if I cut somebody
No,
off.
no, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine.
Okay, swarming. Okay, number one, swarming is a natural thing, and it's it's how honeybees fill the environment, right? So the colony actually reproduces and goes. But what's the triggers? Okay, one thing that has long been said is use the term crowding. When you get a lot of individuals in the hive, and movement through the hive gets to be a challenge to go from one side of the hive to the other. And at the same time, there's a lot of production in the environment of pollen and of nectar. The colony then makes this decision based on those factors that it's time to reproduce the colony by swarming. And they'll do a number of things. One of the cute things is they send out some number of scouts, and it could be as many as several hundred. These scouts will go out in all directions, and they're looking for an ideal cavity that the new colony can go into. At the same time, they'll start to starve the queen because they're taking the old queen with them. Why are they starving the queen? So she can fly. When her ovaries are filled with an egg mass, she's just way too heavy to get off the ground. And so they'll starve her, and they'll even chase her. So it's like aerobics. It's bee aerobics. They'll run her all through the hive to burn calories and to slim her down. At the same time, of course, they're also raising replacement queens, some number, a half a dozen through 27. So yeah, that would be, I guess that would be a good general answer for swarming. Beekeepers, if you don't want them to swarm, you can artificially swarm them so that you still have the bees. And so what you're going to do is make a split. You're going to take some number of bees and brood from the colony that wants to swarm, and you're going to move it into another box. And even though you've lost numbers from the colony, the original colony, you've gained a colony. And the bees that you have moved, that you've artificially swarmed, just like bees that swarm naturally, they're going to be more productive, more interested in building a new hive. So they're going to make a lot more wax. They work on a lot harder in establishing a new nest. So in that respect, it's a win for a beekeeper. Wax is one of the most valuable commodities that we have. And it takes a long time to get wax. And, like in my case, I really haven't been beekeeping all that long. This past year was my 21st season of keeping bees. And yeah, you say, well, that sounds like a long time. No, we've had members in this club that have been keeping bees for 60 years. That's a long time. But anywho, I have a nice stockpile of honey supers, all that I'll ever need with drawn comb, so that when it comes time to you want to make honey, you just throw these boxes on. You keep them stored under paradichlorobenzene to keep the wax moths away from them. But you set them out and you let them air out, and then you just pile them on your hive and sit back and let the girls work.
Hey, Fred. There's 3 questions in the chat list, so I could read them to you. If Cathy, should we keep going? Cathy's our moderator organizer. Are you there, Cathy?
It depends on if Fred's willing to take questions,
Yeah.
and how long people are wanting to stay on.
Well, how about if we just do them pretty quickly then? I know Fred can give a detailed answer. Try these, Fred. They're a mixture. Okay. So Donna asked, how often should we check our hives? Just one during the winter. And where do you find furring strips? Well, that's two questions. That's two parts. How often do you check the hives in the winter?
As infrequently as possible. One of the things you have to be concerned of in winter is, of course, on cool days, exposing the bees to temperatures that are not healthful for them. So, you know, if you're gonna, we're not saying don't get in, especially if you're a new beekeeper, because you actually do want to get in every now and then so that you can learn what goes on in a beehive all 12 months of the year. So, you know, wait for a day that's warm. You know, I would say definitely above 55 degrees, maybe 60 degrees might be better. In winter, one of the things, you know, when you open that box up, you're letting the cool air in, and if they're raising brood in there, you know, the bees have just slimy outer cover, no insulation at all, and they will die of from the cold, from exposure. So, you know, pick a warm day, get in, don't stay in too long. You know, just get in and take a look, see at what's going on. The bees will be clustered somewhere in the brood area. They generally start the clusters low in the fall, in the late fall, early winter, and they chimney up. The cluster, it's like a basketball, it moves up, and reason it's moving up is it's consuming stores, nectar, or well, be honey, so that, you know, they have energy to keep warm and so on. So, you know, that would be the big thing. You can get in, don't stay in long. Don't break the cluster apart. You know, they're in a ball, and if they happen to be between two boxes, you can take that inner cover off and take a look-see in there, and which is okay, but don't go, you know, pulling frames and such at that time of the year, because, you know, you're actually going to be interfering with the cluster itself. Is that good?
Okay, good. Well, that's good. Yeah. And that's kind of an intermediate type question, really. We're still learning about that after 3 years. But for someone who's getting started, here's a good question. How small of an area can you get away with for a bee yard?
However big the box is. Now, you don't need a large area. You have to be mindful of where you locate it. You're gonna have a talk, I think, on the last day of apiary location, and, you know, you'll pick up hopefully a lot of good tips then. I know people, and I have seen people that will put a beehive on their porch. It's, you know, if you, back in the old days when there used to be a lot of door-to-door salesmen, that was probably a fantastic thing to do, because, you know, you wouldn't be bothered at all. But anywho, yeah, you need a small area. You know, you have to be mindful of how the bee's flight path is. You don't want to put the thing somewhere where somebody could get stung. You could even put it on a roof. I've actually seen them on roofs.
Yeah, remember there were some on the roofs of the Cathedral of Notre Dame.
Right.
About in the fire.
And they survived the fire. Thank you very much. Yeah.
That's great. Great. Oh, let's try one last question. And this one follows from what you're talking about, swarming. So should you avoid putting your hives beside dead trees, standing dead trees, to avoid swarming to a new dead tree location?
Actually, that probably wouldn't figure in at all. And the reason is this: when a hive fissions and swarms, it's not an ironclad rule of thumb, but it's a general rule of thumb. The new colony will move at least 100 yards, if not 200 or 300 yards away from the existing colony. And, you know, you could think about it, you know, it would cut down on competition in the immediate area. And so, you know, they're not necessarily going to come out of a box and go into a tree right next to your apiary, mainly because of that that factor. That's something that's hardwired in them to move some distance away from the original parent colony.
All right. Well, those are all the questions. Oh, wait, one just popped up. We'll do this last one. Is it possible, this is from Hannah. Is it possible to have a hive with a see-through material on one side to be able to watch the bees?
Yes. Yeah, there are several people in the Knox County Beekeepers that I have known over the years that actually have a hive in their house. And one wall of the hive is plexiglass, so it's like it's in their living room. And you can actually sit there and watch the bees. And now what they've done is they have a pipe, plastic pipe, that goes to the entrance, and it goes right through the exterior wall of the house. And so that's like the entrance of the hive. So the bees come and go through this pipe, and you can actually then sit in your house and watch the bees. I've also seen them at a number of parks, state parks and national parks, where they'll set up a beehive that is, has one side that is clear that you can look into. You would think that since, they're cavity nesters, that, they wouldn't prefer that, but I've never heard of anybody losing a hive because they have it in one that has, one wall that's plexiglass. So yes, you can do that.
Okay. Well, I think that's just great. And I want to let Cathy have the last word if she's still there. Cathy? And thank you again, Fred.
Yeah, I'm still here. Thanks, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you next Monday.
Yep. Same system. Okay. Bye, all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Fred.
Sure.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay.